Hello, and welcome to the Expanse. I'm Mitch the Quack, and I hope your days are less quacked than mine. Today, we're going to be looking at the Cosmology, specifically the Cosmology map from the Chronicle series. The reason why is that, contrary to popular belief, this map makes perfect sense, and having an understanding of this map not only explains a vast amount of the current magics in WoW, but also sets precedents for massive expansions in pretty much every facet of lore. What will be explained today are the basics of the Cosmology map, exploring what's actually shown on the map. We will then move on to the concept I've come to call the Rings of Magical Influence, R.M.Is for short. Then lastly, we'll be looking at the positioning of everything on the Cosmology map and how that can be interpreted. If you like this content and you'd like to see more, hit the like and subscribe button. If you'd like to stay notified, hit the bell or follow me on Twitter. Timestamps are provided in the description if you'd like to skip to a certain subject. I will state now that this is my opinion, and there will be some interpretation and speculation. I also need to thank Locke from Shinies and Lucky Doos, for without her, the ideas of this explanation / speculation / theory would never have been fleshed out. To begin with, what is shown on the Cosmology map? Well, in the center you have reality, the place where we, the players, and Azeroth assumedly sit. From there, you have what I'm going to collectively call the ethereal realms, the Emerald Dream and the Shadowlands. Outside of them, you have the 6 elements: spirit, water, earth, fire, air, and decay. Outside of them, you have the 6 magics and the concepts related to each respective magic. The 6 magics are light, void, disorder, order, life, and death. And finally, in the 4 corners, you have the RPG symbols of lawful good, chaotic good, lawful evil, and chaotic evil. Where most of you watching already know all of those concepts, a map is practically illegible without legend. Fortunately, one is provided with the Cosmic Forces section in Chronicle Volume 1. It gives the basics of how the facets of the cosmology truly work. This section can be broken down into 4 main parts, and here are the main points to take away from each part. Light and shadow. Light and shadow are fundamental forces of existence. Pure light and shadow exist outside of existence. Light manifests as holy magic, and in lore has been attributed to healing. The void manifests as shadow magic, and in lore has been attributed to consumption. Life and death. Life and death hold sway over every living thing in the physical universe. Life energies are known as nature magic and promote renewal and growth. Death energies are known as necromantic magic and are described as the counterbalance to life. Death is described as an unavoidable force which pushes everything to a state of entropic decay and eventual oblivion. Order and disorder. Order and disorder govern cosmic systems in the physical universe. Order is most commonly perceived as arcane magic. Arcane magic is innately volatile and requires precision and concentration to wield. Disorder manifests as fel magic. Fel magic is addictive, destructive, and is fueled by drawing life from living beings. The elements. Fire, air, water, and earth are the building blocks of all matter in the physical universe. Spirit and decay are how the elements are manipulated. Spirit and decay are primordial forces. Spirit is a life-giving force that interconnects and binds all things in existence as one. Decay is used to subjugate and weaponize the elements. Now, I need to mention Spirit and Decay because of how important their descriptions are. I mean, Spirit's description alone should pique your interest, but what needs to be grasped is the idea that Spirit and Decay can technically fit into the same category as the 6 magics. The reason for this is Spirit and Decay are described as primordial forces. The 6 magics can also be described as primordial forces of the universe. The reason being is that the 6 magics are concepts that will always exist. Spirit and Decay are described as falling under this category of primordial forces, but are considered elements. This implies Spirit and Decay are primordial forces, but the difference between them and the 6 magics is, like the elements, Spirit and Decay are malleable. The closest real-world equivocation I can give is to say, see the 6 magics as similar to the laws of physics, as in they are fundamental laws of the universe. They have and will always exist in some form or another, and they don't change. On the other hand, you have Spirit and Decay, which can loosely be equivocated to protons and electrons. I say loosely because the main points to take away from this equivocation is that, like the rules of physics, protons and electrons have debatably always been a part of the universe. The difference between the laws of physics and protons and electrons is that protons and electrons are actually quite malleable. Neither rarely, if ever, stay unbound and/or are found existing in singular forms. Both consistently change and majorly influence the elements we have in the real world. Hence, why I see Spirit and Decay as a reasonable equivocation, considering what Spirit and Decay do. I'm hoping after that, the differences but similarities between the 6 magics and Spirit and Decay are starting to become clearer. Both are described as existing since the dawn of the universe. To reinforce this idea that the elements in WoW are naturally malleable, I ask you to think of steam elementals, a mixture of fire and water, mist elementals, air and water, magma elementals, earth and fire. Spirit and Decay apparently have this elemental trait of being able to naturally fuse with pretty much anything, or at the very least, other elements. One last thing about Spirit and Decay is the fact that they are affected by the concept of elemental duality. I have another video on elemental duality, and the link will be provided, but basically, elemental duality states all elements have a negative and positive trait, and in turn, it implies they are balanced within themselves. The 6 magics are not. They require another, entirely different magic force to bring them into balance. As an example, order needs disorder to counteract itself. Now, you've probably realized I'm taking the rules from the Cosmic Forces section quite literally, and I am basically leaving myself no wiggle room. I can tell you now, I am doing that on purpose. The reason why I'm doing this comes back to the science equivocations. Because where science is difficult, complex, and confusing, in reality, it actually has fundamentally simple rules that are extremely expansive. I mean, take the laws of physics. There are a lot of them, and they use annoyingly big words, but pretty much all of them can be explained in 1 or 2 sentences. I see the rules of magic, the points I explained from the Cosmic Forces, as the same for World of Warcraft. They are short, absolute rules which explain, but more importantly expand the possibilities of magic within the universe. So now that you know the basics and what's on the Cosmology map, we are now going to move on to what I've come to call the Rings of Magical Influence, or R.M.Is for short. The first ring is the Ring of Reality. This ring is at the lowest point on the Cosmology map, and as the name suggests, it contains reality. This ring is naturally influenced by every other ring. We know this because, to our knowledge, Azeroth sits in this ring, and all forms of magic can manifest and influence Azeroth. The second ring, which I'm just calling the Realmal ring, is a ring that contains other realms. This ring not only, but does include the Emerald Dream and the Shadowlands. The difference between realms and reality is the exact same reason the Emerald Dream and the Shadowlands are different from each other. And that is, realms lack the natural influence of all 6 elements and magics at once. For example, the Shadowlands seems to lack life magic, whereas the Dream seems to lack death magic and or decay. With the lack of something being the premise for a realm, there are quite a few possibilities for what a realm may actually be. The second ring is naturally influenced by the third and fourth ring. The third ring is the elemental ring. As the name suggests, this is where each element has their domain. Am I talking about the elemental plane we know of? The answer is no. By this explanation, the elemental planes are another realm on the second ring. What I'm calling the elemental domains are a completely different can of worms that sit on the third ring. I will mention though, the elemental planes we know of might be segments of the elemental domains. The third ring is only influenced by the fourth ring. The fourth ring is the ring of magics. This ring contains the 6 magics, in what for now I'm going to call their purest forms. The powers on these rings naturally influence every other ring and are basically the be-all end-all of existence. The magics on this fourth ring do not naturally fuse. They do, however, naturally clash. The easiest way to understanding this concept of R.M.Is is by equating them to the current understanding we have of the Earth's atmosphere. The atmosphere is made up of multiple layers. The lowest layer, the layer we exist in, is called the troposphere. You can equivocate the ring of reality to the troposphere because the troposphere is affected by the other higher reaching layers of the atmosphere. These higher layers of the atmosphere though, like the stratosphere, the layer above the troposphere, are barely affected by the troposphere. This trend of the lower layers having little to no effect on the higher layers of the atmosphere, but the higher layers affecting the lower layers, is mimicked until there is no more atmosphere. How the Earth's atmosphere works is how I see the R.M.Is working. The only difference is that the R.M.Is are on a universal scale, separating reality, realms, the assumed elemental domains, the planes of pure magic, and I do have a theory about one other possible ring of influence, but that will be incorporated into the positioning explanation later. What I need to do first is explain the implications of the R.M.Is on magic, specifically magical fusion, the idea of fusing magics together. So the very short implication of the R.M.Is is the reason why magic seems so confusing to determine is because, flatly, in reality and the realm of rings, pretty much everything is possible. If you see a combination of anything on the cosmology you like, it is likely it can happen in the realm ring or the ring of reality. The reason why is that the elements are naturally malleable, so they can fuse together whenever they wish. But on top of that, you have the fourth ring, the ring of magic, which can influence the elements. This basically means, on top of the 6 elements, you can add another 36, because let's say for example, the light influences a set of 6 different elements. Those elements now not only have the properties of their respective element, they also have the properties of light, and in turn are different elements. The thing is, you can repeat this process with the other 5 magics, and how all this relates to the first and second ring is that all of this culminates in reality, the physical universe, and the idea that all these interactions either happen there in the first ring, or they happen in the second ring, the realm ring. I mean, what do you think the difference between a fire mage, a destrolock, priest, and elemental shaman and the way they manipulate fire is? One uses arcane, one uses fel, one uses a light, and the other uses pure fire, and or most likely spirit. Oh, and about the elements, I haven't mentioned the possibilities of naturally fused elements like magma or storm elementals being infused by one of the 6 magics. So there are a lot of combinations. But I hope the potential of this concept is starting to become clear. Now, I know there are those of you already thinking, this is nice, but If the 6 magics don't naturally mix with each other, especially those that oppose each other, how do we get disc priests, light and shadow users, or just priests in general, warlocks, disorder and shadow users? How does that work? I mean, there are also the Titans, who are literally creatures of arcane, but they wield other schools of magic quite openly. The answer I have is actually quite simple, and it comes back to the elements, specifically the description of spirit and its possibilities. The reason is spirit is described as a life-giving force that interconnects and binds all things in existence as one. That statement made me question if spirit alone, or possibly all of the elements, could act as conduits for fusion. As in, on the 4th ring, the Ring of Magic, the 6 magics kind of interact, but they never truly fuse together. They just butt heads. But when a conduit, an element, is introduced that 2 or more separate magics can influence and exist within appears, could 2 magics occupy the same element, or could 2 elements containing magic fuse together? The answer I came to was yes, that could happen. So to give a really basic description of what a priest does is that they wield the light and the void because they attune their bodies, as in the elements they are made out of, or their spirit, to have the ability to be influenced by the light and the void. It's the same for warlocks, and it's the same for any other users of major magics from the 4th ring. To just give one other possible example of how R.M.Is and magical fusion, as I've described them, could actually work and how complex it could be and how expansive it can be, let's talk Ny'alotha. Ny'alotha seems to have very strong connections to the old gods, and or at the very least Ny'alotha. Ny'alotha is definitely connected to the void, but there are other major connections he's demonstrated over time through his major chess pieces. Those chess pieces being Xavius, the Nightmare, Deathwing, the Earthwater, and Jara, Queen of an Arcane Empire and the current leader of the water-based Naga. If you apply the concepts attached to the R.M.Is to Ny'alotha's minions, what you get is the Nightmare, a fusion of void and life with spirit as the conduit. You get Deathwing, which seems to be void-infused earth. And you get Ajara, which seems to be arcane and shadow fused together with the conduit of water. If Ny'alotha's chess pieces are displaying facets of his power, then by the R.M.Is, Ny'alotha is possibly a city that was sunk into a realm of water, earth, life, arcane, shadow, and probably spirit, if not possibly decay. This quite possibly makes Ny'alotha its own realm, a realm of unspeakable horrors that sits next to the Shadowlands but is not in the Shadowlands. Basically another realm on the 2nd ring. And interestingly enough, there is a moon on the Cosmology map, the Blue Child, that sits in proximity to these aspects on the Cosmology map. Main point of that example though is to show how expansive the R.M.Is can actually be, and how there is quite a few ways to fuse magics and elements into various different forms. So, to recap, you know what's on the Cosmology map, and now you have a pretty good idea of what the R.M.Is, the Rings of Magical Influence, are, and how those pretty much explain the mechanics behind every form of magic and or unexplainable force in WoW. Now we move on to the positioning of everything on the Cosmology map. The simplest reason why everything is placed the way it is on the Cosmology map is that everything is placed to show how easily each realm, element, and magic affect and relate to each other. So, for example, fire is not of disorder, but by the Cosmology map standards, fire can be easily influenced by disorder, hence the prevalence of fel fire, and hence why fire is close to disorder on the Cosmology map. This does not mean Arcane cannot influence fire, but apparently it should be more difficult. Basically, the positioning explains why certain fusions of magics are either really difficult to perform, or are just considered near impossible. Take Calia Menathil for example. If the act of raising the dead is intrinsically linked to the element of spirit, then it can be assumed to create a Forsaken is extremely difficult because spirit and death are opposite sides of the cosmology. So, to then create Calia, a light-based Forsaken using spirit as the conduit, would assumedly be excruciatingly difficult. Not only would you be contending with two 4th-ring magics that don't naturally fuse, life and death, you'd also have to introduce one of these magics, death, to an element spirit and the other magic, light, that already have a fundamentally easier fusion and assumedly tighter connection. So that is the Cosmology map explained. To quickly recap what we just went through, the Cosmology map has its basics, which are explained in the Cosmic Forces section of Chronicle Volume 1. With an understanding of these rules, the complexities of this map start to become accessible and easier to understand. The first layer of complexity to get your head around is the idea of R.M.Is, Rings of Magical Influence. These rings explain what magics can naturally affect what. The Ring of Reality is Ring 1, the Realmal Ring is Ring 2, the Elemental Ring is Ring 3, and the Ring of Magics is Ring 4. A ring can only influence a ring below it. With the R.M.Is, you can start to understand how magics interact and fuse together. Specifically, you learn altogether there is the possibility of 42 elements, including the naturally forming elements, but not including elemental duality, possible elemental fusion, and the concept of ratios, which I didn't touch on, but is the thing that was introduced in Before the Storm. Those variables, at the very least, raise the possibility of possible elements to at least 126. You can also come to the understanding that for the 6 magics located on the 4th ring to fuse together, it is highly likely an element or elements from the 3rd ring would be required to act as conduits for this fusion. The second layer of complexity is positioning and spectrums. Positioning shows the ease and difficulty of how cosmic forces relate to one another on the Cosmology map. This is particularly true for the elements and the 6 magics, considering their descriptions. Positioning basically gives a reason as to why we don't see certain magic combinations often, if ever. So, do you think this is plausible or possible? Leave a comment. The best speculation is always done with community. If you prefer to talk about your lore though, I usually hang out in the Shinies and Lucky Dudes Discord, and even if I'm not there, the small community that is usually around is amazing to talk lore, speculation, and anything World of Warcraft with. Until next time though, have a nice day!